Good afternoon. How are you? Well, Thomas Jefferson today says our temperature is about 77 degrees, and the wind's about 5 miles an hour, and you may actually see some of the trees move with the wind, which hasn't been happening. The news today follows the same pathways and doesn't always end up in the right place, at least in terms of perhaps what a general sentiment would be of a good direction, a good vector. Now, one good vector is that Trump will be interviewed by the probation officer in the next several days. And normally that interview is to give the other side of the equation to offset whatever the culpability, the crime, and the involvement of the convicted defendant is. Now, in this case, and it will be considered against him, is the fact that the Attorney General has made judgments about his business practices. We have a second case in which we have information about how he abused a woman and defamed her and paid a pretty penny for it. And we have, during the trial, the contemptuous misconduct of Trump toward court personnel, witnesses, jurors, and the process itself. Now, it's a difficult question to ask a person who intends to appeal to show they are contrite for what they did. But in this case, the guidelines, which are established to give some basis of comparison with other cases, in this case is kind of sui generis, that is, stands alone unto itself. But putting that aside, the guidelines go from something like 1.5 years to 4 years. Now, a judge in those circumstances, with additional reasons, could go above that, because each of the counts is conceptually possible as a 4-year count. So 34 counts at 4 years is not what's going to happen consecutively. But what might happen concurrently is something like a 4-year count, or take some counts for 4 years and another set of counts for 4 years and run those consecutively. So you could get up to 8 years that way. I think a reasonable sentence in this case, and they'll consider the fact that he has not previously been convicted of a crime, but I don't think you can ignore the fact that he's been impeached twice and that there are other criminal cases pending, and that those cases, at least as charged offenses, may be described in the probation officer's report. All of this is kind of a long way to say this is how the process works. We can't say how Trump will cooperate or not. The whole press conference is undermining whatever he might say in the interview with the probation officer. But it does give a foundation for the court on July 11th to find a sentence involving custody, and perhaps even to have him, that is Trump, spend the time immediately for the contemptuous acts, even as he considers them for the sentence itself. Now, another strange thing is happening in the sense of rights presumed that are on the chopping block across America. Now, let me start with the foundation. The foundation is there are those against contraceptives. And it's basically a religious position, because there is among Roman Catholics, not all of them, the notion that if an ovum is fecundated, that is a conception that has to be protected. And so taking Dr. John Rock's birth control pill or any other device was considered an offense, a criminal offense in Connecticut. And it resulted in a case, Griswold against Connecticut. And Griswold was the lead planner of Planned Parenthood in the state. And so they created a situation in which it would be an offense against the statute to test it in court. And they did. Now, Justice Douglas wrote the opinion for the court, but it's important to note that he created a right of privacy, a right to be let alone. He described it as the penumbra, which is sort of like if you look at the moon, there's this light that shines around it. So if you look at the Fourth and Fifth and Sixth Amendments, the First Amendment, you see this penumbral right. Now, other justices on the court were not comfortable with Douglas's formulation, but the decision was 7-2, and so it found unconstitutional, a violation of individual rights and liberties. And among the examples that Douglas gave in his opinion was that, can we really authorize people to go into a bedroom and look for contraceptive devices of a married couple? Not acceptable. And so now this opinion became important because it was important in and of itself, but it also created a path toward Roe v. Wade. Because how far does this right of privacy go, the right to be let alone? And in Roe v. Wade, the answer was a woman has a right over her own body, dominion over her own body, including what she may want to do involving an abortion. Now, what we see here is an assault, a further assault on women and the relationship of men and women to use contraceptives based on this religious notion that every sperm is holy and should be protected without any medical information that this is true. And in my own case, having a daughter who was born premature, 2 pounds 13 ounces, you can see how fragile life is. And I could see in her case what she's had to struggle with for being a preemie. Other babies look grotesque in their normal size as compared to my daughter Diana, who could wrap her entire hand around one portion of my finger. So, and then when she hiccuped, you could see through her body. So these people who think a fecundated ovum is a life, a person, and being are wrong. And the conception of the court as to the dominion of a woman over her own body extends a decent period of time, reflecting that there's no such thing as a person, and there is not a compromise that need be made. And there is a concern about all the other things that can happen that cause an unwanted pregnancy. So we see states and the crazed Republicans seeking out these positions for their church. Well, that's fine. You do that in your church, but you do not tell everybody else that this is what goes on. And we fought this battle, and it's over, but we're still dealing with it. Now, some may have made something of the fact that this old law, when it was first the test before the Supreme Court, involved a $50 fine, but it could involve 60 days to 1 year in jail. And so that was the real kick for it and why it was found wrong. And I'm not saying that anything less than that would be okay. What I'm saying is the effort to fulfill a religious mythical principle can't be used as a point of coercion for people who don't agree with that. that religious belief. Now, there is the Hunter Biden case. There's a chance that the jury will get it this week. It's similar in some respects to other cases in which the evidence is so strong and the defense is weak. And one of the reasons for this is because he had entered a plea to this, and he had basically done everything as part of the plea, and I mentioned that before. Now, there is a principle which is not accepted by the court called jury nullification, which is the jury sitting there as a how would you say it, a representative set of peers looks at the offense and decides to follow the judge's instructions or not, because this is so outside their belief system that the jury hangs or votes to acquit. I think it's unlikely, but it is possible. This is not a comment on Abbe Lowell's abilities. He's quite capable and has made some arguments, and as a result, it's more likely or possible here, as minimal as that may be, as compared to what happened in the Trump case. Now, the fact that we see this encroachment upon the rights of individuals is a very sad state of affairs for America. And we have to push back. And bills that may be introduced in the Congress, the U.S. Congress, can be vetoed by the President Biden if it gets that far. But what we're seeing is state legislatures who are doing this. And these matters will go to court. And we'll see what courts do with this, because strictly speaking, it is a constitutional right to be let alone and to use contraceptives. So that's the principle that's under siege without any good reason to distinguish these current practices. And the only difference is the personnel on the Supreme Court, the cult of six. And if we do win the Congress and the White House, as I hope and expect we will, reforms of the Supreme Court should be among the first and foremost actions that are taken. It's just not acceptable otherwise. And then let's finish up with the Middle East. There is celebration that 4 hostages taken by Hamas on October the 7th were freed in a military action. And this is a kind of a scary event. It was in Nuseirat, and American weaponry was used, and there have been shown pictures of the weaponry. Children were killed. 274 people died to free these 4. And it's one thing to celebrate the freedom of the hostages. It's another question what you do with the remaining hostages when this occurs. It raises the question of all our efforts to encourage peace talks and a cessation of the war amount to nothing. And Republicans intend to bring Netanyahu to speak before the Congress. And I certainly hope we're going to have a mano-a-mano confrontation before Biden. And I think nothing less than his own election may be part of it. And 61% in a poll are opposed to America sending any more weapons to Israel. And as I speak to you, a member of the Israeli cabinet, Gantz, is withdrawing from the government team and seeking an election based on the conduct of the war. Now, don't take that as supportive of what I just said, because his concern is what do we do when the war ends? And there is no plan and no discussion of one. And that's his basis to challenge Netanyahu. Now we have people like Lindsey Graham talking about nuclear arms in the Middle East. The man's never been responsible. He's never held a position on a public policy consistent with any kind of philosophy, only with what is available and works politically for him. And so it's not even that he's a weather vane. He does try to lead America in the wrong directions. So this is the kind of stuff we're dealing with here when we have Republicans speaking irresponsibly, knowing better, putting at risk sensitive negotiations. Now, when I say putting at risk sensitive negotiations, there are personnel within the Biden administration who are quitting their jobs because they won't support this policy. And as far as I know, each of the persons who are in this category are Jews, because they were taught from a young age that this is not what we do. And that's as powerful a statement as any I've heard. And it strikes me that almost every war, somebody comes forward and points a finger and says this is wrong, says it in a convincing way, and it creates enormous difficulty. And Biden not only is, by silence and inaction, cooperating in war crimes, he's putting at risk his own election, re-election. Ironically, on a position of doing the wrong thing when the right thing is so obvious. Anyhow, so that's what I have today. I'm out here on the trees, and the Cathedral of Trees is marvelous. And with any luck, I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.